Government propagandists used fear and glittering generalities in order to convey their message, and as well as racial slurs. You can look at Uncle Sam rolling up his sleeves as symbol of getting down to work, as well as Nazi workers and working to kind of invoke fear in the American citizens. While the government churned out propaganda posters in order to maintain the popular support for buying war bonds and the war effort, movie studios did the same. Disney Studios produced one of the most famous examples of pro-US propaganda in 1943, a cartoon originally titled Donald Duck in Naziland. In the cartoon, Donald Duck has a nightmare that he is living in Nazi Germany, working in a German munitions plant, dealing with what the Disney Studios portrayed as life in a dictatorship and hailing Adolf Hitler. At the end of the cartoon, Donald awakens back in the U.S., kisses his model of the Statue of Liberty, and proclaims that he is glad to be to be an American. The cartoon became an instant hit, particularly after Spike Jonze and his City Slickers recorded and released a version of "Der Führer's Face," a song by Oliver Wallace featured in the cartoon. Disney later changed the cartoon's name to reflect the song title. The Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences also honored the cartoon, awarding it an Oscar for Best Cartoon Short in 1943. During the 1940s, Hollywood movie studios made films to promote the war effort and keep morale high. Many of the most popular films of the era featured either anti-war themes or highlighted patriotism. Many movies, such as Chaplin's The Great Dictator and Jack Benny's To Be or Not to Be, portrayed Nazis as fools and buffoons. Other films, such as Casablanca, had Nazis as villains. The Japanese received the same treatment in films such as Flying Tigers and They Were Expendable. Studios repurposed well-known movie heroes such as Sherlock Holmes and Tarzan, both 19th century creations, to fight fictional Nazis. Many movies from the era focused on life on the home front, including Mrs. Miniver and Since You Went Away. Other movies, such as the 1942's Yankee Doodle Dandy, starring James Cagney as an American showman, George M. Cohan, emphasized patriotism. Documentary filmmakers produced many lasting works in the 1940s. Frank Capra's Why We Fight series summed up all the reasons for U.S. entry into World War II, and William Wyler's Memphis Belle told the story of the U.S. bomber crew that successfully completed 25 missions against Germany. Recovering from Pearl Harbor posed many significant military problems, but also posed significant problems at home as well. Used to federal regulation of the economy, Americans now found the government changing economic and industrial priorities to meet military needs. And in FDR's words, the Dr. New Deal was replaced with Dr. Win the War. To reach this goal, civilian industries converted to wartime production, which frequently required retooling factories and retraining workers. Factories needed more manpower, both male and female, especially to replace workers who enlisted in the armed forces or were drafted. The sheer amount of products devoted to the war effort inevitably led to scarcity of certain foods and goods. The government had to find a way to make sure that military populations would receive needed supplies without subjecting civilian populations to extreme hardships. Still another question concerned relationships between management and labor, how to maintain production without the threat of strikes. One of the greatest mistakes the Axis nations made was believing that most Americans would not tolerate shifting industrial production to build tanks, planes, and guns instead of washing machines, automobiles, and radios. However, American industry and the public soon proved that they were willing to make sacrifices for that sake. Civilian automobile production ended 2 months after Pearl Harbor. Soon, automobile manufacturers had retooled and were producing airplanes and tanks. Other civilian industries did the same, but by 1942, war production involved 1/3 of the U.S. economy. American output of material equaled that of Germany, Italy, Japan combined. The war also spurred the expansion of a creation of new industries. For example, Japanese-controlled territory contained most of the world's supply of rubber. In response, the U.S. built nearly 50 synthetic rubber plants across the country. By war's end, the U.S. had become the world's largest importer of natural rubber to the world's largest exporter of synthetic rubber. All told, U.S. industry produced 30,000 military aircraft, 2.6 million machine guns, 6 million tons of bombs, and 86,000 warships. Henry Ford's Willow Run facility provided another production miracle, this one with the B-24 Liberator bombers. Built on the site of a farm owned by the Ford Motor Company founder Henry Ford, Willow Run had an enormous factory floor. The main building had 2.5 million square feet of floor space. Until the construction of Chrysler's engine plant in 1943, Willow Run was the largest factory in the world under one roof. Willow Run had its share of criticism. The facility produced no planes there until July of 1942, when it merely sent a single unassembled plane to Douglas Aircraft Facility for finishing. The government did not receive the first completed plane from Willow Run until September 1942. The War Production Board, as well as Congressional Oversight Committee Chair Harry Truman, severely criticized delays in constructing planes. However, Willow Run soon became more effective in producing planes. Its airframe production in 1941 nearly equaled that of the entire Japanese aircraft industry in the August of that year. Willow Run was churning out 14 aircraft per day. Efficient mass production techniques let Willow Run deliver aircraft to the U.S. military at roughly half the cost as in 1941. In order to coordinate the production miracle needed to win the war, Roosevelt administration created several boards and agencies to significantly alter American business and the economy during the war years. The War Production Board ensured that military received its resources it needed to fight the war. Since the government had to acquire massive amounts of material to fight the Axis, it also needed to direct a large portion of the industry output to military purposes. Headed by Sears and Roebuck Company Chairman Donald Nelson, the WPB suspended non-essential business activities, such as the manufacture of civilian automobiles for the duration of the war. It also assigned priorities to scarce material and allocated raw material to key industries. It also organized and encouraged scrap drives to recycle waste material into needed goods. One of the things that was in short supply at this time were nylons, ladies' nylons, stockings. So there was actually a black market for that. In addition to the War Productions Board to attempt to allocate scarce materials to industry, it also encouraged civilian populations to recycle waste and scrap material for reuse as war resources. Women and children collected and turned in tons of scrap metal, aluminum, newspaper, and waste cooking fats. The U.S. government especially urged children to participate, calling them Uncle Sam's scrappers or tin can colonels. The WPB estimated that 30 million school children across the nation collected 50 million tons of scraps. It declared that this amount of scrap metal could build 425 Liberty ships. The WPB especially prized waste cooking fats because they were used to make glycerin, an important ingredient in the manufacture of gunpowder. Making 1 pound of gunpowder required 3 pounds of glycerin. Therefore, firing a 12-inch shell from a Navy cannon took nearly 350 pounds of glycerin. Scrap drives and posters using, this is Rita Hayworth, really famous movie pinup girl. World War II demanded significant changes in the nation's economy. The U.S. spent more than $321 billion, that's more than $3 trillion today, fighting the Axis powers. This amounted to more than twice that of the federal government had to spend on its entire existence. As a result, the national debt skyrocketed as well to nearly $260 billion by the war's end. One way the government helped pay its expenses was by increasing the income tax rate. By the end of the war, about 40 million Americans filed tax returns, more than 10 times that number in 1941. From that first time, the government required employers to withhold a certain percentage of their employees' paychecks depending on their salary and how many dependents an employee claimed. That way, the employee would have withheld enough tax to avoid paying a much larger sum at the end of the year to receive a refund from the government. In addition, the government raised $185 billion through the sale of war bonds to private individuals, banks, and industry. While the government sought to pay for the war with higher tax rates and deficit spending assistance to the tune of $185 billion, came also from the purchase of war bonds, a type of savings bond. Many corporations, banks, and insurance companies bought the bonds, but civilians did as well, including children who would purchase war stamps they could later convert into bonds. Many celebrities and sports heroes participated in the bond drives to raise demand. War bonds yielded a substantial benefit to those purchasing them. Bonds could be used as a savings plan for expenditures such as buying a new home or providing for a children's education. Interest rates for bonds were comparable to or higher to the rates for most other savings plans in the 1940s. Here you have some war bond posters. The government realized it needed a system of allocating goods so that both military and civilian populations could get what they needed. In response to this problem was rationing, a way to limit the purchase of scarce goods. Some of the more contested for ration goods included meat, butter, sugar, coffee, canned and frozen foods, and shoes. To effectively calculate what goods consumer might buy, the OPA devised a complicated system of stamps and points. A person without the right combination could not buy a good. Gasoline provided a particularly difficult to ration. The OPA granted most motorists an A sticker for their car windshield, which granted them 4 gallons of gas per week. Essential workers got a B sticker, entitling them to 8 gallons a week. Those whose professions required them to drive, such as physicians, ministers, railroad workers, and mail carriers, received C stickers. X stickers went on government officials' cars and political servants' cars, such as police, firefighters, and civil defense. T stickers went on truck drivers who carried goods essential to the war effort. They could buy unlimited fuel supplies. Regardless of their level of patriotism, many Americans found themselves doing without staples of daily life to be unappealing, and a robust black market soon developed to sell highly prized and highly sought after goods. However, both civilian and military populations generally had goods and material that they needed during the war. These are some ration books, and they even made cookbooks that showed people how to cook with limited rations. In addition to the multi-tiered system for rationing gas, drivers had to live with a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit to conserve gas as well as tires. Rationing ended in 1946. Many Americans found that rationing made many food staples, particularly fruits and vegetables, difficult, if not impossible to get. To alleviate the stress on rationing system, the government encouraged many to plant victory gardens in which citizens could grow their own fruits and vegetables. Nearly 20 million Americans took this advice and started their own gardens. National publications such as Life and the Saturday Evening Post promoted victory gardens as patriotic and gave housewives helpful hints about preserving and canning fruits and vegetables grown in their gardens. A number of pressure cookers used for canning and cooking sold in the U.S. increased 500% between 1942 and 1943. The federal government would later estimate that victory gardens produced more than 9 million tons of fruits and vegetables. So the overall economic impact, there were a number of changes to the U.S. economy that occurred in the World War II era, 1940 to 1945. The nominal gross domestic product, or GDP, which is the value of all goods and services produced inside a country in a year, increased substantially from approximately $101 billion to $223 billion. Wages and salaries rose from $45 billion to $120 billion. In 1940, 14 million women worked outside the home, and in 1945, the number was nearly 19 million, down slightly from 1944. Civilian employment by the federal government more than tripled, raising from slightly more than 1 million persons to nearly 3.5 million. Military employment mushroomed as well. Union membership also grew due to the maintenance of membership clause enforced by the NWLB from 9 million to 14 million, and increases in GDP and employment led to dramatic increases in national debt from 41 billion to 25 billion. The American South and West benefited greatly from the war, economically speaking. The government spending and the need for increased production created millions of jobs in various southern industries, including textiles, chemicals, and aluminum. Urban populations grew by about 40%. Consequently, the number of farmers, including sharecroppers and tenant farmers, fell by about 20%. Shipyards and aircraft factories boomed. Industrial capacity shot up nearly 40%, and per capita income tripled. Western states received nearly $40 billion in federal funds. California alone got more than 10% of this total, with 50 cents of every dollar in personal income coming from federally funded jobs. The military established many air bases and naval stations in Southern California, especially defense contractors followed, founding major shipyards and several aircraft manufacturing plants.